The Indiana Fever were supposed to be untouchable this season. This was supposed to be the beginning of a new era, not just for the franchise, but for the entire WNBA. Every headline, every television network, every sold-out arena seemed to point toward the same thing. CaitlinClark had officially changed women's basketball forever. But now, only a short time later, something feels completely off. And fans are starting to notice it in ways the organization can no longer hide. Because suddenly, the conversation is no longer just about record-breaking crowds or national hype. It is about empty seats. It is about growing frustration. And most importantly, it is about a fan base beginning to question whether the people running this franchise actually understand what they are holding in their hands. That is what makes this situation so uncomfortable. The Indiana Fever were handed the single biggest star women's basketball has seen in decades. A player who didn't just bring attention. She brought an entirely new audience into the sport. Casual viewers, first-time fans, families, celebrities, media outlets that barely covered the WNBA before. CaitlinClark became the engine driving one of the fastest surges in popularity the league has ever experienced. And for a while, it looked like Indiana was perfectly positioned to capitalize on all of it. But then the cracks started showing. At first, fans ignored the warning signs. Some blamed early struggles on roster chemistry. Others pointed toward the pressure of expectations. But over the past several weeks, the frustration has started evolving into something much bigger. Because now fans are no longer only criticizing performances on the court. They are questioning the leadership behind the scenes. They are questioning the messaging coming from the front office. And after controversial comments made by General Manager Lynn Dunn began circulating online, the tension exploded into a completely different level of scrutiny. Suddenly, fans who once defended every move this organization made started asking difficult questions. Why did those comments feel so dismissive toward the player carrying the league's biggest spotlight? Why did it sound like the organization was minimizing the very reason millions of people started paying attention in the first place? And perhaps most alarming of all, why does it feel like the Fever front office is becoming increasingly disconnected from the audience that built this moment for them? Because here is the reality nobody inside the organization can afford to ignore anymore. Fans are emotionally invested in CaitlinClark first. The Fever benefit from that loyalty, but they do not automatically own it. And when supporters begin feeling disrespected, ignored, or pushed away, things can shift very quickly in modern sports culture. Now the signs are getting harder to explain away. Unsold tickets are becoming part of the discussion. Online backlash is growing louder. Rumors and speculation surrounding coaching decisions are spreading across social media. And the deeper this situation goes, the more one question keeps hanging over everything. Is Indiana slowly damaging the biggest opportunity this franchise has ever had? Because what happens next could define not only the future of the Fever, but potentially the future direction of the entire league. When CaitlinClark entered the WNBA, the expectations were already massive. But even those expectations turned out to be too small for what actually happened. Almost overnight, the entire atmosphere around women's basketball changed. Games that normally struggled for national attention suddenly became headline events. Ticket prices exploded. Television ratings shattered records. Arenas that used to have scattered empty sections were suddenly packed hours before tip-off. And at the center of all of it was one player. CaitlinClark was not just another highly drafted rookie. She became a cultural phenomenon before she ever played a professional game. What made her impact different was the type of audience she brought with her. This was not only hardcore basketball fans showing up. Millions of casual viewers who had never watched the WNBA before suddenly started tuning in every single week. Families planned entire road trips around Fever games. Opposing teams moved matchups into larger arenas just to handle the demand whenever Indiana came to town. Merchandise vanished from shelves almost instantly. Sports media that barely covered women's basketball before suddenly couldn't stop talking about it. And for the Indiana Fever, this should have been the easiest momentum wave in franchise history to ride. The organization suddenly had something every professional sports team spends decades chasing: relevance. Not manufactured relevance, real relevance. The kind that creates emotional investment from people far outside your normal fan base. CaitlinClark became the reason millions of people finally gave the WNBA a chance, and Indiana was placed directly at the center of that explosion. But that level of attention also came with pressure the franchise may not have been fully prepared for. Because once fans emotionally connect to a player like this, expectations change instantly. People no longer look at the Fever as a rebuilding team quietly developing in the background. They expect competence. They expect urgency. They expect leadership that understands the magnitude of the moment. And most importantly, they expect the organization to protect and maximize the superstar carrying all of that attention. For a while, it felt like the Fever understood exactly what they had. Every sold-out crowd reinforced it. Every nationally televised game reinforced it. Every viral clip reinforced it. CaitlinClark was not just elevating Indiana. She was elevating the visibility of the entire sport. Even people who criticized the non-stop media attention still ended up talking about her constantly. That is how powerful the effect became. But the bigger the spotlight grows, the easier it becomes for fans to notice every crack underneath it. Small frustrations that would normally stay quiet suddenly became national discussions. Coaching decisions were dissected online within minutes. Front office comments were analyzed word for word. Every roster move became controversial. And because Clark's fan base extends far beyond traditional Fever supporters, the reaction to every mistake became amplified at a level the organization had never experienced before. That is where things started becoming dangerous. Because the excitement around CaitlinClark was never guaranteed to last forever on hype alone. Fans were willing to invest emotionally because they believed they were watching the start of something historic. But once people start questioning whether the franchise itself is capable of handling that opportunity properly, the energy around the team can shift incredibly fast. And unfortunately for Indiana, that shift may have already started. Because what happened next pushed fan frustration into an entirely different territory. The moment the backlash truly exploded was not after a loss. It was not after a bad shooting night or a coaching mistake during a close game. It came from something far more damaging in today's sports world: perception. Specifically, the perception that people inside the Indiana Fever organization were starting to downplay the very player responsible for transforming the franchise overnight. And once those comments from Lynn Dunn began circulating online, fans immediately sensed a problem. To some people, the remarks may not have sounded catastrophic at first, but timing changes everything. Context changes everything. And when emotions are already building inside a fan base, even a single comment can ignite a firestorm. That is exactly what happened here. Instead of sounding appreciative of the unprecedented attention CaitlinClark brought to the Fever, many fans interpreted the comments as dismissive, cold, or strangely disconnected from reality. Social media reacted almost instantly. Clips spread across X, TikTok, YouTube, and sports talk shows within hours, and the conversation quickly stopped being about basketball. It became about respect. Fans started asking why the organization seemed uncomfortable acknowledging the scale of Clark's impact. Why did it feel like certain people inside the franchise were trying to minimize what she had done for the league? Why did the messaging coming from leadership sound so different from the excitement fans themselves were feeling? And that is when speculation started spiraling. Online discussions grew more intense by the day. Some fans claimed there was growing tension behind the scenes. Others suggested the organization was struggling to handle the spotlight Clark brought with her. Rumors began circulating that certain people inside the WNBA were uncomfortable with how much attention one player was receiving. None of those claims have been verified, but the fact that so many people were willing to believe them showed how fragile the relationship between the fan base and the organization had already become. Because perception in sports is powerful, sometimes more powerful than reality itself. What made the situation worse was that fans did not feel like the fever moved quickly enough to calm the tension. There was no strong reassurance, no clear attempt to reconnect with frustrated supporters. Instead, the silence allowed the backlash to grow louder and more emotional. Every new interview, every press conference, and every social media clip became part of a much larger narrative forming around the franchise. And the narrative was simple. People were beginning to wonder if Indiana truly understood what CaitlinClark represented. Not just as a player, as an economic force, a media force, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. That is why the reaction became so intense. Fans were not only defending Clark. In their minds, they were defending the future of the league itself. Many believed they were watching the WNBA finally break into mainstream sports culture in a way it never had before. So when comments felt dismissive toward the player driving that momentum, supporters took it personally. And once that emotional connection cracks, it becomes incredibly difficult to repair. Because after the comments came something nobody expected to see this early in the CaitlinClark era. Visible empty seats. And suddenly, what looked like online outrage started turning into something the organization could actually measure. When fans first noticed unsold seats at Indiana Fever home games, most people brushed it off immediately. Some blamed ticket prices. Others pointed toward scheduling issues or early season timing. A few even argued the entire conversation was being exaggerated online for attention. But then it happened again. And that is when the situation stopped looking like a random occurrence and started feeling like a warning sign. Because this was not supposed to happen to the CaitlinClark era. This was supposed to be the hardest ticket in women's basketball to get. The franchise that could barely keep merchandise on shelves. The team dominating television ratings. The organization sitting at the center of one of the biggest sports growth stories in years. Yet suddenly, fans were zooming in on seating charts and spotting something nobody expected to see this early: availability. And the internet noticed fast. Screenshots of unsold sections started spreading across social media. Fans began tracking ticket movement game by game, almost like investigative reporters. Every update became part of a larger discussion surrounding the state of the franchise. People were no longer just debating wins and losses. They were debating momentum, energy, trust, and whether the Fever were quietly losing some of the excitement that once felt unstoppable. What made the situation so uncomfortable was not necessarily the number of seats themselves. It was what those empty spots appeared to symbolize. Because for months, the Fever benefited from emotional investment unlike anything the franchise had ever experienced. Fans did not simply buy tickets because they enjoyed basketball. They bought into the story. They bought into the belief that they were witnessing the beginning of a transformational moment for women's sports. CaitlinClark represented something bigger than a normal rookie season, and people wanted to feel connected to it in real time. But emotional investment is fragile. The moment fans begin feeling ignored, dismissed, or disconnected from the organization, enthusiasm can cool faster than executives expect. And once that cooling begins, every visible sign becomes magnified. One empty section suddenly feels symbolic. One poorly received interview suddenly feels damaging. One frustrating coaching decision suddenly becomes evidence supporting a larger narrative. That is exactly what started happening around Indiana. The ticket discussion evolved into something much deeper than attendance numbers. Fans began treating it like accountability. Some openly said they wanted the organization to understand that support could not be taken for granted forever. Others argued the Fever front office had become too comfortable assuming CaitlinClark alone would guarantee endless loyalty regardless of how the franchise operated behind the scenes. And the dangerous part for Indiana is that public perception spreads incredibly fast in today's sports culture. Once people start believing momentum is fading, the conversation itself can create even more damage. Suddenly, every game becomes a referendum on the organization's direction. Every crowd shot gets analyzed online. Every attendance figure becomes headline material. And for a franchise that was once viewed as untouchable entering this new era, that kind of scrutiny creates pressure from every direction imaginable. The Fever are now in a position where even small warning signs feel enormous because expectations became so massive so quickly. And unfortunately for the organization, fans were not only questioning ticket sales anymore. They had started questioning whether the people leading this franchise were actually capable of managing the spotlight surrounding CaitlinClark at all. At first, most of the frustration surrounding the Indiana Fever focused on the front office and the controversy around public comments. But as the season continued unfolding, another conversation started getting louder and much harder for fans to ignore. The spotlight slowly began shifting toward head coach Stephanie White, and whether this coaching situation is truly built to maximize a player like CaitlinClark. And once those questions started spreading, they spread fast. Because in professional basketball, coaching reputation matters far more than most fans realize. A respected coach brings stability. Players buy in faster. Veterans trust the system. Free agents become more willing to join the organization. But when doubts begin forming around leadership, those doubts eventually affect everything surrounding the franchise. That is the uncomfortable position Indiana suddenly finds itself in. Reports, fan discussions, and growing online speculation have all pointed toward concerns about how the Fever are being viewed around the league. Some fans believe opposing teams already see Indiana as disorganized. Others have questioned whether the current coaching staff has the tactical structure needed to handle the enormous expectations surrounding Clark's arrival. None of these claims have been officially confirmed, but the fact they continue gaining traction says a lot about where fan confidence currently stands. And the timing could not be worse. Because CaitlinClark is not an ordinary rookie developing quietly away from the spotlight. Every Fever game becomes national conversation within minutes. Every substitution gets analyzed. Every late-game possession gets clipped and debated online. When the team struggles offensively or looks disconnected on the floor. Criticism toward the coaching staff becomes immediate and relentless. Fans especially started noticing moments where Clark appeared visibly frustrated during games. Missed rotations, offensive confusion, long scoring droughts, situations where the pace seemed completely out of sync with the style that made her dominant in college. Those moments fueled growing speculation that Indiana still has not fully figured out how to build around its superstar properly. And in today's social media era, perception becomes reality incredibly quickly. The more criticism surrounding Stephanie White circulated online, the more people started questioning whether the Fever were wasting valuable time during the most important stretch of Clark's early career. Some fans defended the coaching staff by pointing out that chemistry takes time and roster development is never instant. Others argued the expectations had become unrealistic because of the unprecedented media attention surrounding the team. But many supporters were no longer satisfied with patience alone. They looked at the national spotlight. They looked at the sold-out arenas. They looked at the millions of new viewers tuning into the league specifically because of CaitlinClark. And then they looked at inconsistent performances on the court and started asking one brutal question. Is Indiana actually prepared for this moment? That question became even more dangerous because coaching credibility extends far beyond wins and losses. Around the WNBA, players talk constantly. Agents talk. Front offices talk. Reputations spread quickly behind closed doors. If a coaching situation becomes viewed as unstable or ineffective, attracting future talent becomes significantly harder no matter how popular the franchise appears publicly. And that is why this conversation has become so serious. Because the Fever are not only trying to win games anymore. They are trying to convince the basketball world that this franchise is capable of building a long-term contender around the biggest star women's basketball has seen in years. But the deeper fans look into the situation, the more some of them are starting to believe the real problems inside the organization go far beyond coaching alone. What started as frustration over comments, coaching decisions, and ticket sales has now evolved into something much larger for the Indiana Fever. The relationship between the organization and its own fan base is beginning to feel strained in a way that should make every executive inside that building nervous. Because once fans stop feeling connected to leadership, rebuilding trust becomes far harder than winning basketball games. And right now, a growing number of supporters no longer feel like the front office understands them at all. That disconnect is becoming impossible to ignore online. Every press conference gets dissected within minutes. Every interview clip sparks arguments across social media. Fans are analyzing not only what the organization says, but how it says it. The tone, the messaging, the body language. And increasingly, many supporters believe the Fever leadership sounds disconnected from the emotional investment people have poured into this team since CaitlinClark arrived. That emotional investment matters more than some organizations realize. Because modern sports fans are different now. They are not blindly loyal to logos the way previous generations often were. Fans today follow players, personalities, and stories. And in Indiana's case, millions of people did not suddenly become invested in the Fever because of years of franchise history. They became invested because CaitlinClark created a movement powerful enough to pull entirely new audiences into women's basketball. That loyalty belongs to her first. The Fever simply became the organization attached to the phenomenon. And that is why every perceived slight toward Clark instantly creates backlash at a level the front office may not have anticipated. Fans are incredibly protective of generational athletes, especially ones they feel changed a sport forever. The moment supporters sense disrespect, mismanagement, or incompetence surrounding that player, frustration escalates almost immediately. That is exactly what appears to be happening now. Many fans believe the organization has underestimated how emotionally charged this entire moment is. To the front office, some comments may have sounded harmless. Some decisions may have seemed routine. But to supporters who spent months defending the league, promoting the team, buying tickets, traveling to games, and investing emotionally into this new era, those moments carried much more weight. And the internet amplifies every single crack. Negative narratives spread faster than ever in today's sports environment. One viral clip can shape public perception overnight. One awkward press conference can dominate sports media for days. Once fans start feeling disconnected from leadership, every future mistake gets interpreted through that same negative lens. That creates a dangerous cycle. Because the more frustrated fans become, the more closely they scrutinize everything the organization does. And the more scrutiny increases, the harder it becomes for leadership to regain control of the narrative. Suddenly, every roster move feels controversial. Every coaching decision feels suspicious. Every attendance discussion becomes symbolic of something larger happening beneath the surface. The worst part for Indiana is that this situation no longer feels isolated. Fans are beginning to connect all the frustrations together into one larger storyline. The comments, the ticket concerns, the coaching criticism, the communication problems. To many supporters, these are no longer separate issues. They are evidence of an organization struggling to manage the enormous responsibility that came with landing CaitlinClark. And if that perception continues growing, the Fever could face a reality they never expected when this era began. Because fan loyalty, once broken, does not always come back simply because a superstar is still on the roster. This situation is no longer just about the Indiana Fever. That is what makes everything unfolding right now so much bigger than one frustrated fan base or one controversial press cycle. Whether people want to admit it or not, CaitlinClark has become one of the most important figures the WNBA has ever seen from a business standpoint. And because of that, every problem surrounding Indiana instantly becomes a league-wide conversation. The pressure attached to this moment is enormous. For years, the WNBA searched for a breakthrough star capable of pushing the league into mainstream sports culture consistently rather than occasionally. They wanted television ratings that demanded attention, viral moments that reached outside traditional basketball audiences, national debates that kept the league trending even on days without games. Then CaitlinClark arrived, and suddenly all of those things started happening at once. The numbers changed almost immediately. Attendance surged across the league whenever Indiana visited. Television networks saw viewership spikes that shocked even longtime analysts. Celebrities started showing up courtside. Corporate sponsorships increased. Media coverage expanded dramatically. For the first time in years, the WNBA felt like it was operating with genuine momentum, capable of reaching another level financially and culturally. That is why the current tension surrounding Indiana feels so dangerous. Because when the biggest attraction in the league becomes attached to controversy, frustration, and organizational dysfunction, it creates ripple effects far beyond one franchise. Every headline about fan backlash becomes a national sports story. Every viral clip of frustration spreads across platforms instantly. Every conversation questioning leadership inside the Fever organization eventually reflects back onto the league itself. And the WNBA cannot afford for this moment to collapse under the weight of avoidable mistakes. That is the uncomfortable reality many fans are now pointing toward online. Some believe the league and the Fever underestimated just how carefully this situation needed to be handled. Others argue that the non-stop pressure surrounding Clark has created impossible expectations for everyone involved. But regardless of where people stand, one thing has become impossible to deny. CaitlinClark is now deeply tied to the league's future growth. That creates enormous responsibility for Indiana. Because generational athletes do not come around often, and when they do, organizations either build around them correctly or spend years regretting missed opportunities. Fans have seen this pattern before in professional sports. Franchises get overwhelmed by the spotlight. Internal politics interfere with momentum. Leadership struggles to adapt fast enough. And eventually, what should have been a golden era becomes remembered as wasted potential. That fear is exactly what many Fever supporters are starting to feel now. They are not simply worried about one season. They are worried about whether the people in charge truly understand the magnitude of the moment sitting in front of them. They are worried that ego, poor communication, or organizational instability could slowly damage the very excitement that brought millions of new fans into women's basketball. And once momentum disappears, recreating it becomes incredibly difficult. Because sports history is filled with leagues that failed to capitalize on transformational moments when they had the chance. The WNBA finally has the attention it fought for over decades. The cameras are there. The audience is there. The sponsorship money is growing. The cultural relevance is rising. But now comes the hardest part: protecting the moment long enough for it to become permanent. And the deeper this situation in Indiana spirals, the more fans are beginning to wonder whether CaitlinClark herself is quietly starting to lose confidence in everything surrounding her. As the noise surrounding the Indiana Fever continues getting louder, a new layer of speculation has started taking over conversations online. And this might be the most uncomfortable part of the entire situation for the organization. Because some fans are beginning to wonder whether CaitlinClark herself is quietly becoming frustrated with everything happening around her. No one close to Clark has publicly said that. There is no official statement suggesting she is unhappy. But in today's sports culture, fans analyze everything: body language during games, post-game interviews, reactions on the bench. Even small moments that would normally go unnoticed suddenly become fuel for massive discussions online. And recently, those discussions have exploded. Some fans point toward visible moments of frustration during games. Others mention the emotional exhaustion that naturally comes with carrying non-stop media attention while also trying to lead a struggling team. There has also been growing speculation about whether Clark expected a smoother transition into a franchise that appeared fully prepared to build around her immediately. Again, none of this is confirmed. But the reason the speculation continues growing is because the environment around the Fever feels increasingly unstable from the outside looking in. That instability matters. Superstars notice organizational tension very quickly. They notice confusion. They notice inconsistent messaging. They notice when fan frustration starts dominating headlines more than basketball itself. And for someone like CaitlinClark, the pressure is already historic before even adding all the outside noise surrounding the franchise. Because what she is dealing with right now is almost unprecedented. Every single game becomes national content. Every quote becomes a headline. Every hard foul becomes a debate show topic. Millions of people are emotionally invested not only in her success, but in what she represents for women's sports as a whole. That level of attention can elevate a player's career, but it can also become emotionally draining when the organization around them appears chaotic. That is why fans are starting to ask difficult questions. Are the Fever truly helping Clark navigate this pressure? Is the current structure around her strong enough to support a generational athlete dealing with this level of scrutiny? Or is the organization slowly allowing outside noise to consume the situation instead of protecting its most important player? Those questions are becoming louder because many supporters feel like Clark has already given everything possible to elevate the franchise. She brought the attention. She brought the audience. She brought millions of new viewers into the sport. And now fans are beginning to wonder whether the organization is holding up its side of the responsibility. The dangerous part for Indiana is that perception alone can create long-term damage. Once fans begin believing a superstar is unhappy, every interaction gets interpreted through that lens. A frustrated expression during a timeout becomes evidence. A short answer during a press conference becomes a story. Silence itself becomes suspicious. And in the social media era, those narratives spread at lightning speed whether they are accurate or not. That does not mean CaitlinClark wants out. It does not mean there is some hidden disaster happening behind the scenes. But it does mean the Fever are operating in an environment where trust feels increasingly fragile between the organization and the people emotionally invested in this era. And if Indiana cannot stabilize the situation soon, the consequences could stretch far beyond one difficult season. Because fans usually do not abandon a movement all at once. They simply stop believing in where it is headed. The Indiana Fever never expected this moment to feel this complicated. Just months ago, the franchise looked like the center of the sports world in the best possible way. CaitlinClark arrived carrying historic momentum, and suddenly everything changed. Packed arenas, record television audiences, endless media attention. A fan base growing faster than anyone could have imagined. It felt like the beginning of a golden era not only for Indiana, but for the entire WNBA. Now, the conversation feels completely different. Instead of excitement dominating headlines, the focus has shifted toward frustration, controversy, and growing distrust between the organization and the people supporting it. Empty seats became symbolic. Public comments created backlash. Coaching questions intensified. And online speculation surrounding the direction of the franchise has only continued growing louder with every passing week. What makes this situation so dangerous is that none of these problems exist in isolation anymore. Fans are connecting everything together into one larger narrative. In their minds, this is no longer about one awkward interview or one difficult stretch of games. It is about whether the Fever truly understand the magnitude of the opportunity sitting in front of them. It is about whether leadership is capable of managing the pressure that comes with having the most talked-about player in women's basketball on the roster. And right now, many supporters are no longer convinced. That loss of confidence should terrify the organization more than any losing streak ever could. Because fan trust is incredibly difficult to rebuild once it starts cracking. Especially in modern sports culture where audiences move quickly, narratives spread instantly, and emotional loyalty often follows players more than franchises. Millions of people invested themselves into this era because CaitlinClark made them care. That passion fueled the Fever's explosion in popularity. But passion can cool if fans begin feeling ignored, disrespected, or disconnected from the people running the organization. And the warning signs are becoming harder to dismiss. The Fever are now operating under a microscope unlike anything this franchise has ever experienced before. Every coaching decision gets analyzed. Every leadership comment gets scrutinized. Every attendance number becomes a debate online. The pressure is relentless because the expectations became massive almost overnight. But this is also the reality of having a generational superstar. With that level of attention comes enormous responsibility. Organizations either rise to meet the moment or slowly get overwhelmed by it. Sports history is filled with franchises that failed to capitalize on transformative opportunities because internal instability, poor communication, or leadership missteps got in the way. That is why this crossroads feels so important. The Fever still have everything needed to become one of the defining teams of this new WNBA era. They still have the player millions of fans tune in to watch. They still have national attention. They still have time to rebuild trust and stabilize the environment around the team. But time matters now. Because fans rarely announce when they are emotionally checking out. They do not hold press conferences. They do not send warnings forever. Eventually, they simply stop showing up the same way they once did. And if Indiana does not recognize the seriousness of this moment soon, the franchise risks turning one of the greatest opportunities in league history into a story people look back on wondering how it ever slipped away in the first place. If you made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this changes everything, or are people overreacting? Hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. It really helps push videos like this out to more viewers. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because things are moving fast and there's a lot more coming. I want to hear your take. Does this shift the balance, or will defenses find another way to respond? Share this video with someone who needs to see this, especially if they've been following this story closely. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when new content drops. If you've got a different perspective, drop it below. I read a lot of the comments and the discussions here are always interesting. Let me know what you think happens next, because this could go in a lot of directions. And if you enjoy content that breaks things down in a simple, engaging way, stick around. There's plenty more on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.